Winter is upon us, and so is my urge to surround myself with all the cozy things. My single favorite sweater in my closet is this Skyrim Dark Brotherhood hoodie, which, beyond looking epic and not so secretly nerdy, has the added awesomeness of having a super cozy cowl that turns into a fantastically deep fantasy-style hood. But this is only one sweater, and I love the feeling of coziness the cowl gives me in the wintertime. So I decided to make something similar. Equally fantasy, but that could go with a number of other sweaters in my closet. For this project, I used Miss Visid's cowl and hood pattern, which you can purchase on Etsy if you're interested in giving it a try for yourself. I wasn't loving anything in particular in my stash for this, so I made a trip to the fabric store and had absolutely no firm color scheme in mind when I entered. I said, I will let the fabric find me. After a lot of perusing and back and forth hemming and hawing, I eventually settled on this cozy robin's egg blue fleece for the lining, and this absolutely epic teal copper shot Dupioni for the outer fabric. This proved to be a good thing and a not so good thing, which we'll mention more about at the end. Fabric in hand, I was ready to start sewing. The pattern says to cut out the two fabrics at the same time, laying the outer fabric on top of the lining, or vice versa. Pieces cut out, I made a little snip at each marking point, specifically the center front and center back, and the button loops on the one side. I also marked out the button placements with contrasting thread, since I wasn't sure how other marking methods would show up on the fleece. The cowl pieces get joined at one shoulder, and the extension piece gets added to the opposite side. Then those two sides get sewn up, both the outer fabric and lining. Then I stitched up the main seam of the hood on both fabrics. All the seams so far get pressed open, and this really reinforced how much I need to get my own tailor's ham for curved pressing. Then the collar pieces get pinned to the shawl portion of the cowl. Depending on your fabric, this can be easier or harder. I found it really easy with the fleece lining, but tricky with the outer fabric. And then the pieces get sewn together. The cowl closes with button loops made from the outer fabric. The instructions say to make it basically like bias tape, folding once in half, then folding the raw edges inward to the fold. And then they get top stitched down and trimmed down to fit the buttons. Then they get pinned into place on the right side of the outer fabric and stitched into place. With the button loops in place, the outer fabric and lining can be pinned together, first matching corners, and then pinning or quilt clipping the rest of the edges into place. And then we just sew almost all the way around. I left a small gap at one end so I could flip the cowl right side out and poked the corners into place with a makeup brush to make them nice and crisp. Then I pressed all the edges, and I made sure that the outer fabric came just past the lining so there wouldn't be any of the fleece peeking out where I didn't want it. And then I just finished off the gap by hand. I sewed on the buttons, which will be for both the closure of the cowl and to hold the hood in place. The outer fabric of the hood also gets 3 button loops, one on either side and one at the center back seam. Since the hood fabric is larger than the cowl, the bottom edges of the hood get pleated down to match. There is no particular mathing going on here, just playing with the pleats until they match the distance I needed them to be. The pleats get a quick running stitch to hold them in place. Then the lining can get pinned in, and just like the cowl, I stitched almost all the way around. Then I flipped everything right side out, closed the gap by hand, and it was ready to wear. So in conclusion, the cowl I absolutely adore. This was the main reason I made this project, and it 100% hit the mark and fulfilled its goal. I will definitely use this part of the pattern again for other cowls in other fabric combinations. It is very cozy and looks so cool, and I can definitely see adding it to a number of different outfits. The hood, I will be honest, I'm a little disappointed with how the hood turned out. It looks really awesome in all the pictures I've seen, but on me, not so much. With the power of the magic of editing, it looks really cool in the reveal, but IRL, it tends to sit really upright on the back of my head or smooshy on my forehead. It's giant, and not in a way that I love or that's practical for everyday wear. Maybe I just need to play around with it a bit more, but my sneaking suspicion is that the Dupioni fabric is just too stiff to let it drape properly. If it was just the fleece, or the fleece and a more flowy drapey fabric, it might look better on my head, and that is definitely something I will experiment with the next time I try this pattern. I definitely will use this pattern again. It was fairly easy to put together, and I have nothing but praise for the cowl section of this project. Again, the hood section was probably user error, choosing a fabric that looks awesome, but wasn't quite right. So, if you too want a cozy fantasy cowl to keep you warm over the winter months, I highly encourage you to go forth and sew it up. The link to the pattern is below, and I will see you all in my next Geekery Meets History sewing adventure.